6-speed Dakota here, and today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be replacing brake pads and rotors in this 03 Chevy Malibu. Now this car is actually a good example of why checking the outboard brake pad isn't always the best idea. Sometimes you need to actually check the inboard pad too, because in this case the inboard pad is actually jammed up in there and not allowing it to release, which has worn the inboard brake pad out. So unfortunately it's going to need everything, and that's quite expensive. So let's cut to the chase. You're going to need a new set of brake pads. In this case I'm putting new rotors on it because the wheel shimmies a little bit when you hit the brakes from high speed. It's my last packet of the Honda brake pad grease. You're going to need some silicone brake lubricant. You can actually use this for this as well. Permatex makes a product that you can spray on the back of the pad. Of course, good old anti-seize. And tools you're going to need. You need an 18mm wrench for this specific vehicle, a 12mm socket, of course your trusty wire brush, don't know why I couldn't think of it at the time, and some means to get the wheel off. So this wheel nut actually is 3/4 of an inch. I've already looked at the brakes, I've had to drive the car, so I just left the wheel covers off. But in case you're wondering how to get them off, driver slot right there at the bottom of the bow tie emblem, you pop that off. There's all these little plastic lug nut like things, which are also 3/4 of an inch. So what I do is I take my impact gun and I just zip them all off quickly, just one good burst, and they come right off. And then the thing just pops right off of there and your wheel nuts are accessible. So let's get started by taking the wheels off. First thing you need to do is get the wheel off, so that's what I got my impact gun for. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some gloves on because I got in hell from for the last time. Supposedly I was exposing myself to cancerous chemicals, is what the hateful comment said, so gloves. See? Gloves. What we're going to do is we're going to take our 18mm wrench. That's going to sit on this part here of the slider, because if I just loosen this guy, oh man, this thing's in there tight. See that it just spins. So by putting the 18mm on, looks like somebody's already been in here too. So these aren't the original pads, these are Raybestos ones. So this car's got 134,000 K on it, and the brakes would have a little more life left on them if the caliper wasn't all, or if the slider wasn't all jammed up with crap. So we leave the top one in loosely for now, and we're going to break the bottom one loose. That prevents the caliper from swinging around while you're trying to loosen the bolt. So what some people like to do is they like to tip the caliper up and out of the way and pull the pin out. I personally like to pull both bolts out. So, pop the caliper off and set it somewhere out of the way. In this case, actually right behind the CV axle is a really nice place where it's not being stressed by the brake line. I actually forgot about these bolts. And the one thing I forgot to mention, which is a really good idea, is to turn the key on and then turn the wheel in whatever direction that puts the caliper outward. Like that. I kind of forgot about that. Now I have better access. 21's too big. 20's too big. So it's got to be 19. Let's tighten. Now if you got something that's really stuck like this, what you can do is you take another wrench, you actually loop it into the open end like that, so now you have twice the leverage. because these are really big bolts and they really get stuck in there. Big screwdriver. What we're going to do is we're going to pop the pads out. You'll see how difficult this one is to get out. It's because it's all rusted and this clip's all rusted. So as you can see, there's not much meat left on it. Whether this one is easy to get out, there's tons of meat left on it. Which is really, really unfortunate because these brakes are very, very expensive. So unfortunately, this pad is worn out enough to where it's just needs a brake job. That's really, really unfortunate because these brakes are quite expensive. But I guess you get what you get. So one way to prevent that is to come in here periodically, pull a caliper off, and clean in around here and put some anti-seize, and that will definitely save you from having to spend almost $200 worth of brake parts alone. Definitely remember to put some anti-seize on these guys. They're really, really stuck in there. Rightfully so. These things are ginormous. That's one of the reasons why we break them both loose, because you don't want this guy to swing up while you're trying to break it loose. So there's the caliper mounting bracket. Now we can pull the rotor off. This guy's pretty rusted up. We're going to take our wire brush. We're going to clean the hub surface. This is one step that's kind of overlooked by most people. But if you got scaly rust in there, then the rotor won't sit right and it will wobble on the hub, and it'll feel like you have warped rotors, even though they're brand new. Now it's time to put the new rotor on. First thing we need to do a parts comparison. Make sure that these are both the same. Bolt pattern's exactly the same. And on top, the hat size. This one looks a little bit taller, but it actually feels like the flange is actually thicker on this one. Actually, you know what? They're about the same size. They just look slightly different. Now we're going to put the rotor on. And now, I'm going to take this little packet of clips that came with this thing here, and only do one at a time so you know which clip goes where. I believe these are not side specific. Pop it off. See how nice and gungy that is? If these were cleaned out, that would save that problem for that brake wearing out the way it did. There we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our wire brush. We're going to get inside there and clean out these holes. Make sure that that thing can sit nicely in there. Remember, cleanliness is always key, because if something's got gunk in it, the brakes are going to end up looking like they do. Which again is very unfortunate, because it's an expensive endeavor to replace brakes. There we go. There we go. There's one of them done. The screwdriver. Pop the other one out. Clean this guy really, really well. There we go. There we go. 2 new clips in there. Now before we put it back on, I take a dab of anti-seize. I really need a new tube of this stuff. It's kind of chunky. And we're going to put some where the pad rides inside there, down on the bottom here, because that's where the bottom of the pad rides, and of course on the tops as well. And on the backs here. Now what these things are, they're spring clips. And they hold tension on the brake pads. There we go. The reason that these things hold tension on the pads is so that they don't vibrate. They're almost like a vibration. They are a vibration dampener. Oops. Okay, now what we need to do is put a dab of anti-seize on both of these retaining bolts. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull out these sliders. We're going to clean them off and put some Sil Glide in them. So for these sliders here, you don't ever want to use anti-seize, and you don't ever want to use regular grease. That's really, really bad, because these boots and the little bushings in there are made of rubber. And grease makes rubber swell, and that'll jam these things up. So just make sure that there's no pitting on them. Make sure that they're not pitted in any way. We're going to take some. What I like to do is I like to squeeze a little. There's a good air bubble in there. Squeeze a little bit in there. And then we take this and we cover it in the silicone grease. Now you can get the brush on stuff in a can. This is just what they had at the parts store. At the time, I've had that stuff for like 3 years. It's been through many, many, many brake jobs. Just make sure that this thing moves in and out nicely and doesn't bind, which it does, or doesn't. Moves nicely. And I pop this guy out. There we go. And I just clean the old grease off with a paper towel. Doesn't look too bad. All these black marks are just the rubber bushings inside there. A bit of that grease in the hole there. Just a little bit. Oh, that's the wrong hole. Oops. Yeah, that one. There we go. And, oops. Move that one back and forth. It moves nicely. That boot sits in there really nicely too. What we're going to do, we're going to sit the mounting bracket back down. We're going to take our nice anti-seized bolts. Bolt them in. And that's the wrong wrench. There it is, 19. Bolt goes in a little nicer with all that anti-seize on it now. What we're going to do is we're going to take it, and we're going to tighten it up. We're just going to snug the top one, then we're going to snug the bottom one so that this bracket sits itself nicely. And we're going to tighten the bottom one, and we're going to tighten the top one. Don't be afraid to put a little bit of force into this, because these are really big bolts and they do a really big job. I always do top and bottom twice and really reef on it to make sure that these bolts are properly tight. There's nothing worse than forgetting to tighten a bolt on the brakes. So, now this caliper I got hated on for using my C-clamp. In one case, somebody wanted me to use a screwdriver and go in from the top, but there's a clip in here, so I can't do that. And this is actually, if you can hear, that's actually a phenolic plastic piston, and this caliper is actually made of aluminum. So what people were hating on me for as well was not using a brake pad or something to push against. So I'll make sure I do that this time. First I gotta grab my C-clamp. The third hand is kind of slow in the theory of evolution here. Now squeeze ever so gently. Push the piston back into its bore. This is obviously not working. I'm going to work the bit. Can't quite get on the back of the caliper yet. So here we go. Just gently push. Now, I'm not turning this with a lot of force. It's just going in really, really nicely. If you got to put a lot of force into there, chances are that the caliper piston's seized. That's the one nice thing about these phenolic pistons is they don't seize as easily because they're plastic, but after lots of heat cycles they tend to crack. So one thing is just be sure that there's no chips or anything in there. Stupid end. There we go. The piston's pushed all the way back. And it's all nice and clean. We've inspected it. There's no chips or cracks in the piston. I believe that's phenolic. Actually, you know what? That might actually be aluminum. Either way, aluminum's softer than steel. So next thing we got to do is we got to clean the rotor off with some solvent. Take the solvent. We'll wipe the rust-proof coating off of it. you don't really have to worry too much about the hub. Just the friction surface. Very, very important to remember to clean all that stuff off, or else it'll gunge up your brake pads real bad. First couple of stops. So now we have to replace the spring clip in the top of the caliper. So to do this, we use our trusty screwdriver. Pop it out. Remembering which way the thing went. So this end here, the skinny end, or the end with that end goes towards the back of the caliper. I like these aluminum calipers, they're nice and light. So now it's time to put this clip back in. I popped the old one out. Now what we need to do this is a little bit of a tricky maneuver here. There we go, never mind. So all you have to do is slip this end in and pop that end in like that. We're going to sit the caliper back where it was before. All nice and happy, relatively. We're going to take our brake pads. Now be sure to pay attention to which end the squealer goes on, because two of the brake pads are the same and two of them are different. So these are the two with the squealers on, and notice that one is at either opposite end. So what we're going to do, this is the rear inboard pad. So we notice that by the circular imprint in it, because that's the piston on the caliper. And we look and we see that the squealer is on the right hand side when looking at the back of the pad. So then we're going to take the one with the squealer on the right hand side when looking at the pad. Just like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our Honda brake pad backing grease that everybody threw out and I collected all the time. It's my last packet of it. I'm going to squeeze a bunch out onto the back of the pad. This stuff's actually kind of runny for some reason. So it's thicker than that. Yeah, it's probably because it's got no runny in there. There we go. It's come out of suspension. So, this is kind of thick, goopy stuff. So basically, you only really need to put it where the caliper contacts, which on the inboard pad is right in the center. Doesn't look pretty, but doesn't really need to. There we go. Yeah, unfortunately, these outboard pads look pretty much brand new. The inboard pads are all worn out. That sucks, but that's what happens when your brakes don't get serviced very often. So in this case, these two bits on the back here need to be lubricated or greased. This is to prevent it from vibrating even more. What some guys will use is high temp silicone, but really you should only use those on the heavy duty ones, or if you got really cheap brake pads, which I could technically use on these because these don't have a backing plate on them. Unfortunately, these were the only pads they had in stock. Oops. Same thing. There we go. Now it's time to put the caliper back on. Now you might have to give a little force to it because of those spring clips. Now one other thing we're going to do is put a little bit of anti-seize on the bolts. top bolt, or the first bolt's usually the easiest. And then the bottom bolt, which is usually the one I put in second, you might have to push a bit on the caliper to get it to go in. Then we're going to use our ratchet to tighten them back up. Don't forget about your 18mm wrench to hold the slider in place. And just snug it up. Same with this one, we're just going to snug it up. This one actually spins kind of nicely. So just basically, these ones are tight but not too tight. Make them reasonably tight, but don't snap the bolt off, because these bolts are a lot smaller than the mounting bracket bolts. There we go. We notice how the caliper slides really nicely. That's how it should be. Now what we need to do is we need to pump the brakes a bunch of times before we take this thing out, but I got to do the other side, so you guys stay tuned and we'll pick it up after I'm done the other side. Okay, now I'm done both sides, and you're going to make sure that your brake fluid level is good. Now I see how full that is. That's actually over the max, so I'm thinking somebody topped it up when it wasn't necessary. So anyhow, let's go over and pump the brakes if I can get into the car. Move the wheel out of the way. Okay, so now if I focus the camera on the brake pedal, now watch when I press the brake. It goes right to the floor. It goes right to the floor again. And again. And again. Now I'm starting to develop pressure. Now you see why we pumped the pedal? Because if I would have hit the brakes, I would have been in the middle of the road. So now that I have firm brake pressure, we're all good. I can straighten the steering wheel back out. Stupid dinging. There we go. I'll take it for a test drive. Now if I didn't pump this brake, I had to pump it 3 or 4 times to actually get any pressure. I would have been in the middle of the road by then. So that's why we pump the brakes. It's very, very, very important not to forget that. For a 3/4 inch lug on a domestic vehicle is typically right about 100 foot-pounds. Usually for an import, it's 80. Valve stem symbol right there, and a little cutout right there. Set that in there. Just spin it on. Now I hate these things, but honestly these things will never fly off like a push-in one. So I would actually prefer them over the push-on ones because they don't fall off, but they are a pain in the ass to get on and off. And mags are so much better than wheel covers. Here we go. Make sure they're all tight. You don't need to be super tight. They are just made of plastic. So take this guy, we stick it on there. Making sure that this little loop, this little top thing here, sits where the lugs are. There we go. Time to take it for a test drive. Alright, let's take it for a test drive. Pump the brakes up a couple more times, make sure they're all good. Stupid seatbelt falls all the way to the bottom. First, we're going to make sure that the brakes work, which feels like they do. Nobody's behind us. I'm going to make a moderate stop. Not too fast. Just make sure that there's no shuddering in the wheel, no squealing noises, no nothing like that when we hit the brakes. Everything sounds okay. Get going a little bit more. Again, make a moderate stop. Just use the brakes a couple times. For performance brakes, they do have a bedding procedure, but these you just want to use a few times. Make sure they're all good. Get all the crud burned off the pads. Okay, now this is my straightaway that I like to punch it on. Firmer stop. They feel really good. I don't have that little shudder in the pedal anymore. It wasn't too bad, but you could definitely feel a little bit of a fluttering in the brake pedal. Remember, obey your local traffic laws. I'm not encouraging that you break the rules. Alright, so that's how we put brakes in an 03 Malibu. Procedures are pretty similar for other vehicles like... trying to think of what else is similar to a Malibu. Anyhow, you kind of get the point for a lot of GM vehicles. So thanks for watching. Be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook.com/6speeddakota and Twitter @6speeddakota. If you have any car questions, you can ask me on Facebook. And yeah, anyhow, I'll post new uploads and whatnot on my Facebook page. And if you have any big questions, you can ask me either on Facebook via a message, or you can also ask me using a PM on YouTube. Anyhow, glad you enjoyed the video, and take it easy, everyone.